All right. Wow, applause already. This is great. My name is Tom Swann, or if you're looking for me on Twitter, I'm Tam Swann, which is for historical Ballymena reasons, shall we say. The title of this talk is Doing More Design. So my experience as a developer, I've kind of worn many hats, shall we say, over my career as an engineer. I've had about 13 years of experience. I work at the moment for State Street. Prior to that, I worked for Anomaly, and before that, for many years, worked for Kainos in Belfast. So I've kind of worn a lot of those hats, architect, engineer, team lead, in those various different positions where it's a position where you are considered, the person that does the design, or you're the design authority. And I'm kind of going to talk a little bit about what I consider design to be, first of all, and why I think it's a valuable thing we should do more of, but also then to talk about just my own experience. Projects where at the end of it we sat down as a team, we talked about the things that we did well, the things that we didn't do well, and design was a particular thing that we thought, well, wow, that actually worked really well. And if we were to do this again, there's a lot of things here that we would actually take forward into our other projects. So when we talk about design, right, there's this kind of continuum that design can potentially sit on, and on one end of it is this. So my memory from years ago when I first kind of got into this was design was like this thing that happened in between analysis and a team of people actually going and turning this kind of grand vision that someone had had in a Word document into a reality. And on the other end, there is design as the code, almost, right? So there are no real artifacts which exist externally to the code base to communicate or describe to people what a thing is or what it does, or the types of decisions that were made along the way to it getting that way. And I think the reality for most of us is that we live somewhere in between those two extremes. And I'm particularly interested in design as it applies to Agile projects and as an activity that Agile teams do, okay? Because we're kind of quite far away, I would imagine, most of us, from that big design up front kind of world. But then design on an Agile project and how you incorporate it into people's work, the stories that they work on, is a challenge as well. And I wanted to highlight this kind of oft-quoted line from the Agile Manifesto. So we favour working software over comprehensive documentation. And it's often misquoted because people take it to mean actually documentation is not a thing you should ever do. It has no value. That's not what it says. It says there is a hierarchy of things that we value. Working software is the thing that we value the most. But documentation, and anyone who has tried to use an open source project that has terrible documentation can attest to how valuable good documentation actually can be and what we can get out of it. So why should we do more design? And when I talk about doing more design, I don't mean you personally go and do more design right now. I mean, how do we as a team, how do people as a team working together do more design? How do you get people who maybe feel that it's a thing that they're excluded from because of their level of seniority, their experience, that this is a thing they have to actually ask permission to do? How do we try to make that better? Well, I think first of all, looking at the value of doing design itself, there's this quote from a book by Robert Martin, Uncle Bob, his book Clean Architecture. The goal of software architecture is to minimize the effort required to build and maintain the required system. Right, so if a design is good, if an architecture is good, then what that should actually result in is that the cost to change that piece of software over time in response to changing business requirements, in response to a changing technical context, the cost to do that should actually be positively impacted by that design. And the inverse of that is, a graph that's not going up and to the right, this is a bad time. So this is illustrating the inverse of that, which is the impact of a lack of thought being put into the architecture or a lack of good design on software over time. And what this is basically showing is how the productivity of a team is impacted over iterations. You can consider that to be releases or sprints or whatever you want. And really, this is another one of these things where there's two polar extremes going on. There's the project that you walk into, and it has maybe 5 years of history behind it. The code has evolved over time. It has had input from lots of different individuals. It's had to respond to lots of different external pressures over time, and people have had to make compromises because that's just how it works. And then on the other hand, there's the completely greenfield, blank slate project. Everyone's bouncing out of bed in the morning going, yes, this time it's going to be different. Mistakes were made, things will be done right this time. And of course the reality of it is that over time, the grand vision that people has to succumb to those pressures eventually, even with the best will in the world. And what we're ultimately hoping to do by doing design well and treating it seriously is to try to minimize the impact of that, right? We don't want people to be fighting the mess. We want people to be actually trying to deliver features, to actually deliver value to the people that are ultimately paying for the thing. So the technical debt problem, basically, we want to try to minimize that. So the other thing I want to talk about before I go on to talking about open design is this factor of intimidation that sometimes exists around this, right? And the reality is, people who get into positions where they are seen as the design authority are often there because they have really strong opinions and they're not afraid to tell you those opinions. So when I talk about intimidation, I don't mean some big person coming and looming over you, and well, I hope not. I hope that's not happening to you. Otherwise, talk to someone. What I mean is, it's like an implicit thing that happens. So if you've ever been in a conversation with someone who you looked up to, or who was the person who was the authority in the room, and you had a conversation that it was sort of framed as a discussion, but actually the reality of it was, someone was presenting to you their grand vision or their idea of how this should be, and you were expected to basically go along with it and execute it. Intimidation is ultimately a strong word, but I think it's the reality of it. If you're in that position and you wear that badge, whether you're doing it consciously or not, you carry that with you, and people who are in a more junior position will likely feel that. They will feel that need to defer to your judgment. So the canonical example, just before I go on, the canonical example of trying to mitigate against this type of thing is planning poker in estimation. So planning poker was this technique that was developed to try to mitigate against the loudest voice in the room. So the person in the room who is perceived to have the most experience, to try to allow other people to be involved and feel like their opinion was being taken seriously. So regardless of what you think about estimation or how estimation should be done, that was a good thing. That was someone trying to introduce a thing into that social context to make things better for people. So what I want to talk about, what I'm interested in, is how we can apply that, not through a similar technique, but the similar principle to doing design when we're working on a team. So we've had open data today. We've just had open banking. So if you're playing that game, now's the time to take a shot, is what I would say. Open design, it's open in the sense that it's trying to get everyone in the room involved again. So it's that similar principle to what I was just describing with planning poker. It's open in the sense that it's open to all the stakeholders or all the people who are involved in the design of the software and trying to get their voices heard. And it's a really simple idea, okay? This is not a new thing that I'm describing or something that I came up with. This is examples of this you can see in the IETF, RFCs, PEPs in the Python community would be a similar concept. It's basically a standard template or a basic format that allows people to contribute their ideas to how a piece of software should evolve. What that looks like is, in the case that I'm going to describe to you, is a really dead simple template. The important thing about this is, though, that it's getting away from the free-for-all that wikis can sometimes turn into. So there's this sort of expectation that design is just a thing that happens. We'll put up a wiki and it'll just suddenly somehow be magically populated with all this great information that people will be able to use. Now, it doesn't really work like that in practice. You need to have some kind of way of codifying it. You need some kind of way of saying to people, this is not something you need to ask permission to do. Okay, you have license to do this. This is something that we'll support you in doing. If we look at what actually goes into a story as part of your definition of done for the story, this is something that, if we deem it necessary, if we feel like this is a piece of work which actually would necessitate writing some kind of design, then that goes into the definition of done for the story. That's something we should estimate for. That's something everyone on the team should be expected to take on. And the specific example that I want to talk about for this is a project that is open in the other sense of the word, in that it's actually open source. And the design is truly open. The design is part of what we open sourced on this project. So if you go to the Ministry of Justice GitHub account, if you search for APVS and look at the wiki, you will see pretty much all of the technical design, all of the technical spikes, the technical research, all of the work over the course of that like approximately year-long project that we did as a team. So this is not big design up front. This is a lot of design that happened over a lot of time, and it happened because we sat around as a team and said, this looks like a cool idea that might work, shall we try it and see what happens? And we evolved it over time, and we came up with a template at the start that was quite heavy and had a lot of stuff in it, and eventually we just kind of like cut it down to, yeah, whatever you think, like whatever you feel like. Almost, because in reality what you want to get out of this as a team as well is you want to also get the opportunity for everyone to learn new things, right? So if you prescribe or you're overly prescriptive about the kind of things that go into a design, so you have to use this diagram or whatever, you're overly restricting people's creativity. So I learned a lot from this. I learned a lot of different tools. I learned a lot of interesting things about how you could actually evolve design on a project. So the content that actually goes into, let's say, one of these designs, I've kind of loosely broken it down into two different flavors, if you like. On the one hand, there's what I'm calling component design. So in this example, this is like, calling a web service of some description. There's some web service that we want to pull data from. How do we incorporate that into our architecture? And this is what you would think of typically as, traditional architecture and design. What are the different components of the system that are there that we need to build? What's the granularity? How do these things talk to each other? And people would come up with, maybe a simple diagram, a simple summary of the requirements, look at different options, look at the costs. All of this would go into a fairly lightweight document about how we actually wanted this feature to be built. And the key thing, again, about all of this is that really these are all tools for facilitating conversations. So back to the planning poker example, that's really, if you're doing it right, what planning poker should be. It's actually just an excuse for the team to kind of get together, to talk things through, to come up with ideas. So the other side of this then is technical spike is basically jargon for technical research. It's like a thing that you don't fully understand and you need to go away and find out what your options are. You're not at the stage yet where the output of this is something that you go and actually build, okay? The output is better understanding. So we had lots of different technical spikes in this project. I've deliberately chosen like the most boring, prosaic thing I could think of, which is like a postcode lookup, right? Like, boy, if you need a wheel reinventing. And as it turns out, lots of people had reinvented this wheel, so it was actually a useful piece of research to do. So we have to, again, consider the project within the wider context of what we're delivering. So we're delivering within MOJ Digital. MOJ Digital has built X, Y, and Z postcode lookup services. There are public postcode lookup service APIs. There are APIs that maybe they've paid for and forgotten about. There are all these things that would feed into what the best decision is here. So you need to undertake this bit of research. And I think that's often what people think of actually when they talk about design as part of software projects. What they're actually thinking of is that kind of role that exists for people to go out and look at different products, look at different tools. How much does this cost? Who uses this? That kind of thing, looking at the licenses. That's almost a whole other aspect of design and experience that people can have beyond just saying, this is what the class hierarchy looks like, this is what the functions look like, and so on, at that higher level of abstraction. So the other thing then that I want to really focus in on is that point about learning new things. So I learned some pretty cool things, I think, as part of doing this. I learned that websequencediagrams.com is really awesome. So what this is, if you haven't seen this before, it kind of looks like it's a lot. This looks like it's a lot of work. Like this looks like you could maybe take some time, some serious quality Visio time, to knock something like this out. But actually, it's just a really simple plain text format, and they have an API that goes and generates these diagrams for you. And this brings me to, I think, another important point about how you facilitate this type of thing, like how you actually get a development team to buy into doing design in this way, is if you're asking people to like battle with some horrendous document management system in order to contribute to shared design, you're immediately putting a barrier in the way of people being able to do that. You want to actually choose tools that are developer friendly, that sit somewhere within their workflow. So if it's a thing which is some kind of plain text format, it's a thing that they can put in Git, they can evolve it along with evolving the software, then that's all to the good. You'll get people to really appreciate that you're trying to consider their workflow and you're trying to make it easier for them to do this. I mean, if you have to go for a drag and drop interface kind of thing for building diagrams, I really like Draw.io. Again, for similar reasons, although it has a similar look to something like Visio or OmniGraffle, it's online. It allows you to interactively share the diagrams with people and collaborate. And I think that's really key. Often I think people are kind of put off creating artifacts that describe design because they suffer from the same problem that things like comprehensive comments suffer from, which is the creep that happens away from the artifact you've produced and the code base. So this drift that can happen, it's just another thing to maintain. So if you make that maintenance as easy as possible and like lower that barrier to people keeping a thing up to date, then you really reap the benefits of that. So do more design. I think there are a number of good arguments for why this is a thing that people should consider trying to sort of actively engage a team at all levels. So again, it's trying to get away from this sort of gateway that often exists, the technical design authority, the single point of failure. The one person who kind of is the gatekeeper for all this, and to try to democratize it, to try to create a more bottom-up system. So, we've talked about the benefits of design to the maintenance costs of a piece of software over its lifetime. There's lots of literature out there. There are, in any project I've ever worked on, there is like a queue of people standing up to defend the schedule, and defend the arbitrary dates that have, sorry, not arbitrary dates, of course, carefully considered and dates that people have come up with. It's really the job of us as the developers to stand up for the quality of the software. That's our job. There's plenty of people who'll say why X made up date needs to be met. It's our job to actually stand up for the quality of the software and say, no, actually, there's technical debt that we need to pay off. There are real benefits to us doing this, and there are real significant business risks to us not doing it. And people will take that seriously. People have to, because we're the experts. So think about how you can alleviate the intimidation factor. Intimidation is a real thing. I know I'm guilty of this. Like, I know I'm guilty of people feeling that maybe they can't approach me, or feeling that, because I have said a thing, that's now the way things are. And it's so easy to do. Like I say, it is an unconscious thing. And when you reach a certain level of like weatheredness, shall we say, in this field, it's easy to forget what the perspective of someone who's just coming in fresh is. Like, it's so easy to forget that. Like, think about, when you first started out on day one, you came in and there was, architect X and principal engineer Y, and you're like, my God, how can I sort of naysay these people's opinion? But I think, if you do try to adopt an approach to design like what I've described, I'm not saying this is like the perfect way to do everything. There were lots of things about it that, if you go and look at that wiki, if you browse through it, you'll see things that probably have too much detail in them, where we probably just over-egged it. We could have, maybe lost a few things. But I think overall that approach of trying to get everyone involved is actually really a good thing to do. Creating more opportunities for learning. Like I say, I learned lots of cool tools. I learned lots of things that different people brought to that discussion. Lots of people brought their own perspectives that I hadn't thought about, and knew about tools I didn't know about, and I was able to then mercilessly steal those things. And ultimately, I think, the goal of all of this, ultimately do more design means do more communication, right? It just means facilitate more conversations. Each of those ODPs on that wiki was a chance for the team to actually get round and have a discussion about it. So in the same way that essentially code review is turning programming into deliberate practice, right? Because you're sitting down and you're critiquing something and you're getting deliberate, really, measured feedback about a particular thing. Do the same thing with design. Design is not something that just sort of magically happens. You have to do it to get better at it, and that's a really way to get better at it. If people, create a diagram, and someone who's been knocking out really beautiful diagrams for years takes a look at it and says, "Oh, well, you haven't really thought about this thing. What's this arrow actually conveying? What sort of protocol is this?" And really drill into it and get people to think about things that they maybe haven't thought about before. So really facilitating conversations is ultimately what it's all about. So again, this is not my original thought. I'm going to embarrass someone in the audience actually, because he's here with his glorious mug. So I stole this from Deputy CTO of Kainos Digital Services, Rory. To be fair to Rory, it's not his original thought either, but it was the last person I stole it from, so he gets the credit. In terms of really good references, so the first one, Clean Architecture, that I referenced in the previous slides, is a really good book. It's by the author of Clean Code, which is often taken as a real touchstone for people wanting to improve how they write code. This is a really good book because it looks at a lot of those general principles of what makes good architecture and good design. So it's much more focused on that component design half of the equation that I talked about. So this is very much about how software components interact with each other and what a good design should look like. And then the second one's just kind of me throwing in a book I really like. It looks like it's quite specific in its topic. For some reason it's called Principles for Scaling Websites, but it's actually really quite general advice. It's got a lot of have you thought about kind of content in it. It's just a really good reference. I've referred a lot of people to it for things like, why is microservices a thing? Like, why do people like system components that are actually decoupled and have this particular granularity and talk to each other in this kind of way? So I really recommend that. And that, I think, is it. So I should have left some time for questions, hopefully. But if there's a question that you want to ask me personally afterwards, happy to do that too. Yes?
How do you handle choosing the best ideas? You've got a bunch of good design ideas coming in at the same time.
Talk about it. You talk about it. And again, this is, that's a bit of a flippant answer, but effectively, you can't really get away from the fact that on any given project, there is someone who wears the hat of, it's my head. That's just a reality. But ultimately, you want to try to trust people. And ultimately, you're often, like, regardless of how little experience you think someone has, if someone's given the chance to go and do something and try to crack this particular nut, they're going to really, in my experience anyway, jump at it and do a really good job of it. Because they feel the motivation from within them to go and do a good job of it. So I think it's a nice way, again, to try to create a more bottom-up sort of culture for this type of thing. But the thing is, because again, like I say, it's similar with code review. So you give someone a component to work on, they go away and they work on it, and then they get feedback as part of that process, and it's a similar thing. And when we were initially trying this out, we tried to not have it be, just junior developer and Tom Swann or lead dev or whoever it was. We tried to sort of have at least maybe two people, sort of try to spread the knowledge a little bit, get some more feedback in it. Because again, if you do that, it kind of just becomes the same thing again. It becomes everything's going through this one person. If you're referring to sort of the technical specs, like how you choose between the different options, to be honest, yeah, that one probably does fall on the design authorities for the project more, that type of thing, like the technical spec type of thing, the postcode lookup type thing. And that's just actually because practicality reasons in the project. It's often the senior developer or the senior architect or someone who's actually on site with the client or talking to the client architects and having those discussions and there are usually other pressures and other interests that go into that decision. But that's the decision part. The actual research for someone to go away and look and maybe get on the phone to people and find things out, anyone can do that. And anyone should be encouraged to do that. Again, I think like people, if they're given that opportunity, really jump at it. Okay.
Sorry, quick one.
Yes.
Design, do you see much as an iterative process where you're actually going away, testing your theory, going actually, no, that's the wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, again, that probably falls under the, where I've seen that most probably is that technical spike side of things. So although I chose there, an example that was like different choices of services you could make, where I've seen this before is, for example, choosing something like data storage, like which database are we going to use? So to a certain extent, this is maybe how we structured our project, but we had a phase of our project right at the start where we had a period of weeks in which to look at those kind of decisions. So we have, if you go and look at that wiki, you'll see sort of early technical spikes around those different things. You'll see, things like, should we look at Postgres? Should we look at Mongo? Should we look at past versions of this? Hosted versions, whatever, So a lot of that stuff went into that, and as part of that, in the code base for that repository there as well, you'll see some prototypes that people developed for those things. Maybe like just a Docker container that shows a vertical slice of something like, here's how this could work. So that's definitely a valuable thing to do. I think where it's appropriate, if you want to kind of look at, you kind of have to get into that level of detail at some point.
And would you subscribe to the process of prototype and throw away?
Yeah, I would subscribe to that. Now that can be, again, depending on how much people are bought into that, because often, that is seen as wasteful in some way. How can you throw a thing away? But as long as you know it, and we were lucky in that we were bought into a client that understood that and understood that, there is value in the outcome being you've learned more than you knew at the start. So that's sort of an expectation management thing, I think, around that.
On the other hand, whenever you have like a requirement gathering phase, and those requirements might change,
Yep.
and they might change quite drastically, how it might change the design dramatically. How would you deal with that part?
Well, it depends how much you mean by dramatically. Like it can, I believe there's actually a talk I'm really looking forward to this afternoon, which is about the whole idea of rewriting, right? So one of the outcomes of that downward turning graph is that people reach a point where they go, oh my God, this thing is just a mess. We need to like burn it and start again from scratch. And that's often, like that's the infinite loop version of that graph, right? You start round at the beginning again and you end up on the same path, on like the road to despair, kind of. But more specifically to your question, there are some examples of that in there actually, where we weren't fundamentally rewriting the whole thing, perhaps, but we were making enough changes for it to be significant enough that we needed to go back and say, we need to change all of these things because actually the example of this is we built the system for rules for Scotland, England, and Wales. And then Northern Ireland, because we're special, came into the equation, and we had to go back through the process and rewrite a lot of stuff to incorporate Northern Ireland into it. So that kind of thing, we had some particular there's some diagrams on there that we came up with which are similar to the sequence diagrams, but we had kind of a color coding system to say this is a new component, this is a component that we've modified, and just some, like what was the impact to things like testing on this and so on. So, there's varying scales of it. There's that where you need to go back and redesign something to a certain level, and then there's, my God, this is all wrong. We need to burn it all down. But hopefully, if you're doing that incremental design and you're learning and feeling fast, you shouldn't hopefully get into that position, ideally.